Hello, everyone. My name is Julie McVey, and this is Unordinary Made Ordinary, where we talk about extraordinary experiences of everyday people. And today, our guest is Lesley Lupo. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. I'm so glad you decided to spend a little time with me. I'm very excited about this conversation. So thank you for being here. Would you mind, Lesley, just to get us started off, telling us a little bit about yourself, a little background on yourself?
Oh, okay. I was born in Chicago and I went to college in New Mexico. I have a double major, developmental psych, and a BFA in studio art. I like art and science. I lived around the world. I lived in Morocco for a couple of years. I moved to Tucson when I came back to the States. I got married and I was working at my husband's dude ranch, which is where I had my near-death experience. Then things didn't work out with us. We got a divorce. I have 2 kids. I have 5 grandchildren, which I'm excited about, all little ones. And I used to work at Canyon Ranch. I worked in the metaphysical department. Like, I would think I was almost like a spiritual life coach, working to help people get back into their spirituality in a way that they felt comfortable with and in a way that they could relate to. When I got run over by the horses, I was an atheist. I was, had no interest in, I thought when you died, that was it, and I didn't care. And then this NDE happened and I had to when I came back, it totally altered the way I was living. I couldn't go back to the way I lived before, obviously. So
You didn't grow up religious or spiritual, your family, mom and dad, and
well, I was raised in a traditional family that's a very traditional religion, Catholic, and I couldn't relate to it even as a child. So I actually declared myself, I think I was 9 when I declared I didn't believe in God. Got whooped a lot for it by the nuns, but I stuck to my guns. And then I went to college in New Mexico, and I had a lot of the Native American people or shaman from West Africa. The Ivory Coast was at the school, a young man, and everyone kept saying to me, why do you have your lights turned off? Because I was very intuitive as a child and it frightened me. So I started working with them and exploring more Eastern philosophies. And then my fiance died in college, and I thought, if I'm so intuitive, I should have seen it, and I didn't. So I threw it all out again and went back to being, there's nothing, this is just the body, a very materialist scientific point of view. And that lasted until I got run over. And that kind of changed everything.
wow, that's difficult. So just to go back, so there were a lot of shamans for some reason where you lived at that time.
My priest was teaching me. I had certain Native American medicine people. Now, they weren't teaching me medicine practices. They were just working with me to get my sensing, my understanding the bigger picture and seeing the spirit world. Yeah, it was, I just crossed paths with some really, really extraordinary teachers.
Wow.
Some worked with a long time, others it was just 2 or 3 times we sat down, talked, and it, every faith centers around meditation. They call it different names, but it's stilling the mind. Every faith has them. So I learned how to still the mind, but then again, I got bitter and threw it all away. And
that's terrible. I'm sorry to hear that about your you said fiance. Was that your fiance?
Yeah, my fiance in college. Yeah.
Man, that's difficult. Did you, when you were going through these trainings and teachings and doing your meditation, did you feel like you were tapping into any clairabilities like clairvoyance, clairaudience, the intuitive sensing? Did you feel like it was increasing?
Oh, extraordinarily so. Well, I could see when I was very little, I would see these people in the room that no one else could see, and I didn't know that no one else could see them.
Oh,
And I would talk to them. And I remember my grandmother took me, we were in the garden, and that was one of the first times I started seeing them. And my grandmother brought me in the house and put cold compresses on my head. I think she thought I was in the sun too long because she couldn't see the person I was talking to. And so I was always intuitive. But then it scared me. So I shut down.
of
You
course.
can shut down. I thought it was just something within. I always
Hmm.
thought it was my inner self. And I just shut my eyes to it and it went away because it was scary to have these things happen and no one could explain it to me.
Of course.
And it began to frighten me, even though whenever I saw any of those beings, they were full of light and love, and there's no negativity in them. But at the same time, there was no one to explain to me what it was.
Were these human beings that had lived a life before, or more celestial kind of beings, or both?
No, I talked about them in the book. When I went upstairs the first time, when I first got there, I walked up to a table of people that were waiting for me. And they were some of the beings that had come down to visit me on Earth. I call them, in my book, I call them light beings. And, but that's like my soul group upstairs. So those were the ones that I had seen.
Wow.
Primarily down on Earth, was 3 or 4 of them.
Interesting. Wow. Would you mind, Lesley, kind of taking us through the near-death experience, how that happened?
Oh, sure. I was working down, we had a cowboy come in that was a little under the weather. And so I sent him home and I jumped in the wrangling department to help out because it was March, it was busy season. All the people were there on their Easter and spring breaks. And at the very end of the day, we were unsaddling the walking ride, and the fast ride, the loping ride, was going to come in at 3:00. And so I was unhitching the horses and helping the guys unsaddle. And when I was bringing some horses in, one of the horses flipped over the lock and booked it down to the hay barn with his saddle on, and another horse slipped out behind him. So I jumped on the fence and I shut the gate and I took a couple halters and told the cowboys, I'll go get them. There's a danger because a lot of horses want to roll after, the end of the day. And they could hurt themselves if they got a saddle on. They could hurt themselves, they could break their back. So I ran down and I thought I was really excited because they were standing right next to each other. Well, this was right after the last ride and they were crammed in, touching each other. And I thought, well, I could just wiggle between them. Well, horses are like, I'm busy. They're just like ignoring me and I'm trying to wiggle between them. And when I got up to the saddle, I actually got stuck because it's all leather. It's not their nice slick hair. So I turned around and I grabbed the back of the saddles and I thought I could push myself past the cinches and the parts of the saddle that were rubbing against each other. So that didn't happen because immediately when I put my hands up, it's like I popped out of my body and was standing about 15 feet away. Now, if you had said to me, what part of you is popping out, Lesley, I would have said my mind, because again, I didn't believe in the soul or the spirit or anything. And I was shocked. I was so shocked. I couldn't even think because I was standing watching myself struggle and trying to push between these horses. And then all of a sudden, to my consciousness, my soul left, one of the horses screamed, and all of the horses bolted. They just ran. There were 7 or 8, ran in a direction. And there I am caught in. What happened was because I had been turned around, when one hit me, my arm went through the stirrup all the way up to my shoulder, and I started getting dragged and kept to my feet, because if you fall in a stampede of horses, I was thinking, I guess I was thinking, because I wasn't aware of what Lesley Lupo was doing, but I watched myself struggle. I watched myself scream for help and cry out. And I watched myself, the horse that I was hanging on kept hitting me with his head and kicking at me, and finally slammed me into the side of the hay barn, the concrete metal part of the feeder trough. And then I watched myself, almost like slow motion, just kind of fall to the side like a bag of, big bag of potatoes, very heavy thud. And I knew I was dead. There was no doubt in my mind. I didn't think I was unconscious. But the thing that surprised me was the fact that I was outside the body. Now, if someone had seen that, because no one was there, the cowboys were up unsaddling rather. The other ride hadn't come in yet. I was alone. If someone had witnessed that, they would have said, oh my gosh, she suffered so much because of all my screaming. Yet I didn't feel a thing. I watched it and I had serenity. And there was a knowledge that this is the way you let go of the form. It was almost like you're taking off a tight jacket and throwing it on the bed. It just had a nonchalance to it. I thought was kind of odd. And I remember thinking, does everybody pop out before they die? Or I would have thought the soul would leave at the very last exhalation. But I was out maybe 20 seconds or 25 seconds before, the body dropped. And I felt such lightness and love. And, I looked down, I thought, oh my gosh, am I a ghost? But the first thing I thought was, is this it? This is what everyone's so afraid of? Looking around the corral, and I'm thinking, I'm still here. I'm still thinking. And then I looked down to see if I was a ghost, and I wasn't. I was wearing what I was wearing on the ground. I had like a little blue light kind of around my skin, just like that blue that you see when you're flying in at night in the airport, that kind of blue. So and I felt lighter. I felt like all my cells had separated, and I had this amazing breeze going through. And I felt such nostalgia. And the sounds, all my senses were like really heightened, like I could hear better, I could see better, the colors were richer, and the love and the lightness I felt. And then I saw some cowboys coming in with the last rides, and I watched them, and I felt my heart go, oh, I know what they're going to do. I've done it so many times. You bring in the ride, you go back and you lock the gate, because that was the last ride. And they came over, they saw me laying there, and they started all racing over. And at that point, everything in Tucson just started fading. It just went into a light. It's not like, I know a lot of people say they felt like they were flying. I felt like I was over the ground hovering. I didn't feel like I was touching the earth, but I didn't feel movement in me as much as I saw movement all around me. And Tucson just began to fade out at the time this big, thick forest began to fade in. And as alert and hyper aware that I was on Earth when I first transitioned to upstairs. I felt really groggy. I felt
Oh,
low. And I knew I was in a different place. And I looked at my hands and my skin looked like I was in college again, like, really, really young. And I had big freckles. And I was a girl and I'm touching my hair and it's short. And I'm like, short hair? I don't like short hair. Why do I have short hair? And I was wearing this really pretty, like almost like an ultramarine blue long shift. And it had like a belt on it, but it was very beautiful. The colors are so much richer up there. And the amount of love I felt on Earth, if you multiply that by like 1,000. And the first thing that struck me was, being, studying psychology all my life, we're aware of that fight or flight reflex. Well, I didn't have anything like that or anything. I had all the love that a human can feel multiplied. I had zero fear. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know who I was. And yet I just felt comfortable, like this is perfect. It's all love, and it's the colors, the intensity of everything. It's like everything was slightly translucent. The trees, the flowers. There's a very thick oak looking forest with a little river behind me.
So it was more vibrant, but it was also translucent.
Just slightly. It looks like everything, like it looks like it was lit. The example I give is in art, we call it something is backlit. And if you're ever walking in the morning or the afternoon, late afternoon, and the sun is behind the tree, you can see the sun coming through the leaves.
Yes.
The whole tree like that.
Yeah.
Like it's lit from within.
Wow. Yeah.
And so there was no sun, there was no shadows, but it didn't look like a cartoon. And trust me, I've tried over and over again to draw it or paint it or seen some other people's paintings. And it sounds smarmy and cartoony, and it wasn't. It was natural, and I felt very grounded in this love, and that it was a normal, I felt love coming from everything around me, like I'm lovable. And I felt the same love going out to them. And then I saw some people over to my left. And when I went over there, and you don't like walk, it was almost like when I looked over to where I wanted to go, it was almost like a picture. I'm there. Two pictures later, I'm right there. And most of the talking was all telepathic. So when I was writing the book, there were conversations that took pages, but it wasn't that way. It was like if I asked a question, it would almost be like the first two words, and then it was all downloaded immediately, completely downloaded into my consciousness. I'm not sure if they were triggering my memory or if I was learning, who knows? Because I don't. I know that I've read some NDEs and the people are so certain. And I wish I was, because all I can talk about is my experience. And there are some that are very similar. I mean, I think we all have a lot of similarities, and yet we all have a lot of differences.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, due to individual taste. And I don't see it as a better or worse, or more evolved or less evolved. I just see that there's a lot of realms up there. And that was later on in the journey when I noticed there were other realms. It was almost like we were in a bubble and there were bubbles on top of the bubbles, and there were other realms. So we just started talking, and basically they said to me, I was supposed to, when Sean died, apparently he and I were in the same soul group, and we had come down and we'd kind of made up a deal that we would go down, kickstart some energy, and then return. And at the very end, right before he died, I was supposed to be in New Mexico with him, but I changed my mind and I went back to Chicago to work in the summertime to get money for college. And at the very end, I mean, I'd moved in all my stuff into his house, and I'd left the dormitory, I was living with him. And then at the very end, I said, no, I have to go back. It was like a week before he died. And it was very distressing for both of us, that I was doing this, but I felt I wanted to get the jobs I had. I had 2 jobs and I could make a lot of money. So I didn't have to work in college. I could just do my studies. And I was doing all that work with the shamans and stuff. So and the medicine people and Bonnie, who was teaching me tarot and astrology and numerology and stuff. So I went and that's was apparently I made a choice to stay, and they said that's okay. But now you have a choice again, because you can go back to Earth, or you could stay up here, because you were kind of off contract when you stayed. And I said, okay. So I asked a lot of questions, like, what would I do if I stayed up here? What would I do if I go back? And just, it's a lot of dialogue about how we evolve and how we grow. The theme that I picked up was kind of based on reincarnation, about the souls coming down again and again and learning. Yet it wasn't like a punishment to come back. So I got a sense that if the soul does not want to go back, no one's forcing them. But the souls, it seemed to me that the most important thing is growth and learning and evolving and becoming better people and becoming better, more connected to helping others. And I noticed that learning upstairs was as exciting as a vacation is down here. It seemed to me that we do a lot of studying and learning and then come down here to see how it plays out. And it's funny because this is almost like a play we're in, and we have a lot more power to write our script than we imagine. And once we get that awareness, we can change a lot of the trajectory of our life. I don't believe that people can predict the future. I don't think it's carved in stone, and that would take away free will. But I do think we're on trajectories. And when I was working as an intuitive, my background as a therapist is not too far behind. And I was able to help people figure out ways to accelerate their growth and release the negativity or some of the subliminal programming that they inadvertently picked up. And so, it's a long story, and I've written a book about it, but there's a lot on my webpage. If people want to go there, there's a lot of information. But it's, I went and they said they wanted me to be a little more grounded. And then I walked around and I talked to some other beings. And then I finally sat with the group again. And we discussed a lot more detail. And then I made the choice to come back. And then it was interesting because it's almost like they were trying to talk me out of it, telling me it was going to be very isolating. Now, this was 1988, and there was very little known. Because I was an atheist, I had no spiritual connections. I didn't know anything about Raymond Moody and his incredibly important work that he's done. And the only thing I found afterwards was Kubler-Ross's books on dying, and the fact that there's hints of another side when people are dying, but I had never read a near-death experience. And I had a very bad head injury. I was in the hospital a couple of months. I lost a lot of my memory, but I never lost that memory. I lost my memory of Lesley Lupo's past. But as soon as I could talk, I was talking about upstairs and the love, and I wanted to share it with people. And the first thing I wrote was, heaven is real, earth is the illusion. Because so many people say heaven's an illusion. And I was like, no, 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 no. You're reversing it. It's like heaven's real. This is the illusion. It doesn't mean we can't suffer. It doesn't mean suffering's not real. It's just, heaven is just ultra real. It's just so unbelievably profound and so difficult to describe. I'm always at a loss for words. And whatever pictures I paint, it's like, the analogy I use in my book, it's like showing someone a photograph of the Grand Canyon. You can't even imagine what it looks like when you take a photo. And that's about as good as we can do in presenting what we've seen.
Right.
Because it's such a multi-sensory.
Yeah, so many things you've shared. I mean, a lot of NDEers have shared similar, but like you said, there's these unique pieces to each story, as unique as the individual. Oh boy, can you tell me the name of your book? Well, tell the listeners. I know the name of your book, but tell the listeners.
It's called Remember Every Breath is Precious, because at the very end, when I was coming back, it was the first time I felt discomfort, because I felt like I was being kind of squeezed into a sausage casing. They put me in a chair in this room where the energy waves were just like rippling around me, almost looked like water, but it was just energy. And I felt like I was being compressed. And I gasped. And Rao, one of my, I only talked to 2 people. There were 11 people at the table. I made the 12th. And in the second room, there was only 5, and then I made the 6th. But Rao and Mina was the other 2, the only 2 I talked to. And when I gasped, Rao stopped the process. And he said, you don't have to go back. And I looked at him and I said, no, I will. And he said, okay. And then he said, remember, every breath is precious. And then I just went back. It was funny because they had come and tried to resuscitate me. At one point, they said, she's gone, go get her husband. And we're looking for a blanket or a sheet to cover me with. And then all of a sudden, so they were trying to resuscitate me like 6 or 7 minutes or 8 minutes. I don't know how long they did it. And they stopped for 2 or 3 minutes. And then all of a sudden, doing, I sat up. And I don't remember any of this. They told me this later, but all the cowboys and the guests were like, Lesley, are you okay? And the doctor was like, be quiet, be quiet. He said, what's your name? And I said, well, everyone's calling me Lesley. So that must be it. And he goes, where are you? And I said, Chicago. And he's like, how old do you think you are? And I went, 14. He's like, no. And then by that time they found Bob, and he came walking up. And they said, do you know who he is? And I'm looking at him, I'm going, my father, because I'm thinking I'm 14. And, and they're like, no. But by that time, I just collapsed. And then I was in a coma for a few weeks. And yeah, nobody wanted to hear it. So it was very isolating.
Yes.
I kept getting threatened with psychiatric, hospitalizations. The doctor told me at one point that he'd give me so many drugs I would not know if it was day or night, and tell me about feeling powerless. I mean, because all my family, they thought my talks were, he kept saying she's psychotic, it's damaged. And they believed him. He's a doctor. You never question your doctor, do you? No, except I do. But that's me. I always ask questions. It was really tough. It was a tough few years. And they told me that too. They said, for several years, it's going to be very difficult. Well, you're upstairs, several years feels like about, a millionth of an inch. And I'm like, so what? You know, it's like, I'm all love. And I'm laying there. So many times I've been crying on my bed and going, you should have told me better what you meant by this. But no, it's all good.
So it has been a rough go, but now,
It's like a roller coaster.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's life, isn't it? Yes, it is
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah. It's difficult for everyone, you know.
For everyone. And it's so interesting to me when you said you took off that thick, tight jacket, and when we talked before, you said like a girdle that was 4 sizes too small or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like when they're sending you back, they're trying to shove you back into that little
Like,
container.
felt like I was being compressed, like I couldn't breathe. And that's why I went, you know, like, wait, what am I up for? You know? And yeah, it was that compression.
When you decided, okay, I'm going to go back, did you remember who Lesley Lupo was, her whole life and everything?
No, they showed me, good question. They showed me a lot of that the first time. When I first came back, they showed me, they had this amazing energy ball in the middle of the table. Well, it was like a column. But then when they were going to show me something, it would kind of go like a circular thing. And then it looked like a hologram that was 3-dimensional. And when I was walking down, for example, they showed me how the accident occurred. The cowboys were all unsaddling. And if anyone knows horses, there's always a pecking order. And when you have a herd of 150 horses, the ones at the top are the meanest, toughest horses. And they have, and the meanest of the mean was Montana, not with people, just with the horses.
Mm-hmm.
And when he had just been unsaddled, and I was struggling in between these two horses, when he walks down to the hay barn, puts back his ears and nips a horse who screams, and then they bolted on both sides of him. I was on one side. And that's what started the stampede. And it was interesting watching me because I could see me. I could see myself. I was about this big, and I had the halters, and I was kind of twirling them to try to get the horses to move away. I still had my spurs on. I could hear the little jingle, you know, and I was watching myself go up. And then I watched it again from like a bird's eye view, like a hawk flying over. And I still had that sense of tranquility. I didn't feel the nervousness, even the first time. I mean, she was freaking out and hysterical, and I didn't feel like a molecule of that. I just felt such serenity, and it was just natural, like you're letting go.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you popped out. I have interviewed a few other NDEers who said the same thing. They popped out before the accident.
That's good to know, because I remember thinking that myself. I wonder if people pop out before the body dies. The consciousness it's dancing around, you know? I mean, they're happy, they're light, they're like free from that. Even though the body may be suffering and crying out, they're not feeling a thing. They're, you know, probably trying to give you love so that you can, you know, I remember when I was sitting there watching them come over and try to resuscitate me, I moved over there, or I glided over there, and I was kind of yelling, no, leave me alone. I like where I am. So, but they couldn't hear me, because I was like, no, don't do that. But that was, yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of a hopeful thing to know, that many pop out of their body before the suffering, because a lot of people will think, oh, when she or he was dying, I saw them go through so much pain and suffering.
Right. They're not.
But
I'll tell you, yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it's just amazing to me, like that you're seeing Lesley's still responding in pain, the physical body. She's responding as if she's, but you, the true Lesley, I guess,
Yeah.
is like, no, that's just the body going through its.
Right. I didn't even think that. I just watched. It was
Okay.
just watching respectfully the transition of life. And you watch it with love. I wasn't frightened, I wasn't nervous. And it's funny, when I was working at Canyon Ranch, I used to do the lecture called The Science of Near-Death Experiences, because there's a lot of scientific research now that to prime people who have done a 20-year and a 40-year study and have written books about it. And I did, I talked, and then I do it like every month, every couple weeks. And people returned back to Canyon Ranch, and this woman came up. I was in there and I was just kind of writing down what we were going to talk about, the titles of the other books so that the people could read some amazing books on near-death experiences. And the woman came up and she said, I just want to tell you how much you helped me. When she went back from a year ago, 4 months afterwards, her mother had a massive stroke and it took her 3 or 4 days to die. And she never regained consciousness. And she was an only child, and they pushed a bed in the room so she could stay at her mother's side. And she watched her twitch and moan and, and then all of a sudden she remembered. And she said to her mom, she was holding her hand and she was just kind of caressing her hand. And she said, I know you're not feeling this. I know you're not in the body, that you're dancing around this room someplace. And all of a sudden she felt on the back of her head, her hair just kind of moved. So she looks around, there's no, vents or anything, but that was what her mother would always do. She had big curls, and her mother would always muss her hair, just play with her hair, because her mother had really long straight hair. She had gotten her curls from her dad. And she said, okay, Mom, I'm imagining that that's you. And it happened again. So by the time she's telling me this, we're holding hands and crying, just
Oh my gosh.
that she could understand that her mom wasn't feeling a thing, that her mom was with her and just helping her make this transition. Because it's an odd thing to say that I watched it with love, but I did.
Yeah, like, oh, I love that body. That.
It's odd, and people go, how could you, I said, I didn't feel anything negative. I felt love.
Yeah.
Because it was just like, taking off your shirt, and just throwing it in the laundry.
I think this could be a very hopeful message for parents who have children who've passed and they think that maybe they suffered, and it's very likely that they were out of their body before the dying process.
Yeah, and I've talked to a few other near-death experiences that even the ones that one lady I talked to had been killed in a car accident, and she remembers the sound of the brakes and the car coming, and then she was just out. She didn't experience it. It was like a blank spot. Whereas I watched it, she'd hop out of the car and watch it, but she remembers being in the car and all of a sudden hearing some screeching of brakes. And then the next thing she knows, she's totally out of her body. So she, again, I think was pulled out and just didn't experience that. But the human body is, that's like the protector of the soul. So yes, it's going to fight tooth and nail to stay alive.
Right.
Soul's like, I'm really want to go over here now, So
when you were upstairs, as you call it, that's so sweet. I love that.
Well, do you know why I did that? Because I was an atheist and I was not ready to use the word heaven.
I'll just call it upstairs.
Oh no, I had to go research because I had to figure out what had happened.
Yeah.
I knew it was magnificent, but my scientific brain kept saying, but what if it was a hallucination? What if, all these things? And the more research I did, the more, in fact, that's why Dean Radin gave me such a great recommendation, because he liked the fact that I researched it, and so many different angles. So, yeah.
And I love that our senses, our sensations are heightened. even when we're just outside of our body in this, looking at the 3D environment around us, and then even more so when we go upstairs. It's
Oh,
hard to imagine, but I've heard that many, many times as well. It's just like, wow, we're just barely scratching the surface of what in this physical body as far as what we can experience. And like you said, the love is the love that you have now. Oh, that you feel. Yeah, that's nothing in comparison.
right. It's like multiply it by 1,000. And the most important thing that really made such a striking impression on me was the fact that I had no fear. There was nothing of
Yeah.
that fight or flight
Yeah, I
or
like that.
reflex in me at all. It
Mhm,
was like all that wiring was gone.
mhm.
All I was
I guess
love.
that's really only needed for this planet because that's our survival.
Well, it's a biological reflex. It's become a motivational force.
Mm,
But as a biological reflex, it stops me from walking out on my little farm and stepping on a rattlesnake
sure.
or walking. But, and that's all it should be. You
Right.
know, when I tell people, okay, so my favorite chocolate is like those little truffles, and you get them and they're wrapped. So to me, the immortal soul is only love, and that's the chocolate. And the human body is the wrapper around it to protect it.
Mm,
And it will fight tooth and nail to stay alive.
mm,
But, you know, a lot of times I read things and people are saying you have to live without any fear at all. And it's
mhm.
in our DNA. I don't know how that could be accomplished. I
Right.
think it's reduced to a biological reflex. But at the same time, we don't want to be totally naive and we don't want to be paranoid. And when I do my workshops, I teach people how to be in a place of just objective and observational and without judgment, you know,
Mhm.
just no judgment attached, to recognize. I mean, unconditional love is for everyone. However, you wouldn't take a serial killer home for the weekend if they called you up from the prison and said, you know, he's been in here 30 years. We were thinking of giving him the weekend out. Would you take him? No, I wouldn't take him. But we can unconditionally love him as God's child and not throw them in the Coliseum and torture them to death like they used to. But there's a unconditional love, in my opinion, does not include the word vulnerability in it. So I can unconditionally love everybody, even White Sox fans. I have to say that in public. But intimate love is where I'm vulnerable. You want to keep those people your level of emotional and spiritual maturity.
Mhm.
It's like, so you could have a very dysfunctional family member, but you take good care of them. You're just
Sure.
not emotionally vulnerable to their opinions. Does
Yes,
that?
yes. It does.
So I
Absolutely.
those two apart separately.
Lesley, can you share maybe one or two more profound, I don't know if you'd call it lessons or downloads of information, maybe that you received from upstairs that you think the listeners it would be good for us to know?
Well, profound. I that's a good question. There's a lot of little tiny things that I know. I don't know how big they are, but I think for me, that first thing about understanding that we can be selfless to a fault. We want to be selfless,
Mhm.
but not to a fault. And that we have to have this differentiation with highly dysfunctional people. We can unconditionally love them, and but our intimate friends, family, neighbors, whatever, they have to have that maturity. The second thing that you know, I really, really learned was that you're going to learn and grow until you die. And I learned how to forgive myself when I made mistakes. And
Mm,
I learned how to, it's like a three-part forgiveness is three parts. And I taught my children this way, and I've taught school class. I used to teach chess in a grade school, and I use the same technique with the children. Was number one, own it. Number two, fix it, apologize, fix the window, whatever. And number three, which is rarely taught, is, okay, next time I'm in the exact same situation, I'm going to handle it this way instead. Because when you give your brain two options, like someone, gets in my face and I slap them, I don't want to do that next time. If someone gets in my face, maybe I'll turn around and walk away politely and just say, let's talk later, when the dust is settled or whatever. It's just each scenario we can better ourselves. I don't think there's an age at which you're going to stop learning and growing. I know that I can imagine the sequoia trees that are 2,000 years old waking up one spring and going, yeah, this is big enough. No, they grow. Everything is growth oriented. And so learning and be open. I think Jung had a really good point. When we see something in someone that really irritates us, overly irritates us, look within and see if I'm doing the same thing or something similar. And that's a good way to learn how to clear your plate and grow past fear reflexes. Because every action a human being does is either rooted in love or fear. And fear rather is the first impulse. And that's when you say, okay, there's my protector. Thank you for letting me know that something's off. What does my love part want to do? And I've had so many people in the workshop say, oh, well, then you have to put up with things. I said, no, being a doormat is a fear response. We're not being doormats, So it's learning how to include yourself in your decisions so that you're doing the best for everyone, not just the best for them. And forgiving yourself when you make mistakes, because humans are the most creative animals on the planet. There's not another animal on the planet that changes radically what their parents teach them. And we do. And so we are wired, and that's how we learn, is trial and error. And one of the things I think when we get into our 30s and 40s is we really begin to get hard on ourselves, saying, we should know this by now. We should not be making all these mistakes. No, you're not. You're going to make mistakes till you die. They're fewer and farther between, but some of them are pretty intense. And it's just learning to grow and learning to love yourself. In addition to, I don't think that self-love is conceit. I think it's actually rooted in humility. Conceit is coming from fear. Loving yourself, knowing you're an immortal soul, and the wrapper is where the fear reflexes are. So when I get an impulse to slap someone, I always go, oh, that's not me, because I'm the soul. And if you can remember that, that's just your big dog that needs to be trained a little bit, that's trying to protect you. And so that's one of the biggest things, I think, is knowing that my fear reflexes is not me. I'm the immortal soul.
Yeah. And I think those are lovely, helpful words to kind of leave and wrap this up, because we are out of time and I know you have another commitment. But before we go, how do the listeners connect with you? And I'm going to put your links in the video description so everybody can refer to those, and get your book as well. And so, yes.
My webpage, it's Lesley, spelled the way I spell it, which is LesleyJoanLupo. So lesleyjoanlupo.com. And it's got a lot of information about the book. And I'm in the process of writing a second book, because the book ends 25 years ago. And I've had so many letters of people saying, what have you learned? So I'm writing a second book about all the things I learned, and it's like a workbook where people can do that too. And then I'm going back to put my workshop online, both in written exercises, and then I'm going to do like a video. and then I'm going to start doing live workshops again. So it's a process.
Wow, wonderful. Okay. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Lesley, for sharing your experiences and so much helpful information. And just thank you. I really appreciate your time. And thank you to everyone watching. This has been Julie McVey with Unordinary Made Ordinary. And I hope you'll join us next time for another fascinating interview. And if you did like this, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like this type of content, subscribe to the channel, and you can hit the bell icon if you want to be alerted to future videos. And I hope you're having a fantastic day or evening wherever you are on the planet or off the planet, even if you're upstairs watching this.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.